budget is telling your money where to go instead of wondering where it went. Good evening and welcome. This is Face the Nation. Our topic of discussion today is Budget 2022 and the country's economy. Where are we heading by the end of the year as far as 2022 is concerned? Is it too early to decide, or is it apt for us to take a forecast for the future? To discuss all this and more, we've invited a few guests to our studios this evening as well. Let me quickly introduce them to you. Joining us this evening on the show are N.R. Gajendran, tax specialist. Also joining on the show tonight on Face the Nation is Dr. Anurag Ekanaika, economist and former chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. Dr. Ekanaika has been featured on Face the Nation before as well. Also joining us tonight on Face the Nation after a very long time is Indrajit Aponsu, Senior Lecturer, Department of Economics, University of Colombo. Let's start off tonight's show with Indrajit Aponsu, Senior Lecturer, Department of Economics, University of Colombo. Indrajit, tell us, what is a budget and what should be the expectation of the people when it comes to a national budget of a respective country? Your time starts now.
Budget is basically the expenditure income statement of the government, but it goes beyond that because everything that the government does have implications as to how it affects people, how it being translated into businesses, and how the rest of the world sees the Sri Lankan economy from the point of view of, especially investments point of view. So the budget does create two layers. One layer is a policy layer, the other layer is the expenditure income layer. So these are not separate ones, but when it comes to policy layer, it's more like projection. But when it comes to expenditure and revenue layer, it's more real. The expenditures, for example, where the budget expenditures are, very often very difficult to manage. And it's something that goes all the time above the revenues you have. Revenues, on the other hand, is a future, and it's not a commitment. If the economy does well, if the budget instigates some kind of economic growth, so the revenue is going to go up. But otherwise, it is always going to be a challenge between the expenditure and the revenue. When it comes to the final analysis of a budget, and very often the budget implications have goes across the society. It affects people at the bottom and people at the top as well. And depending on the way you handle the budget, the impact can be different as well. For example, if you have a highly tax-oriented budget, so it is going to affect the top layers very often, assuming that it's on the corporate taxes and income taxes. But on the other hand, if you try to have a budget where the taxes are moved to the indirect taxes, as we call value-added taxes, then it's going to affect everybody across the board. So the implications can be quite significantly different the way you handle the components of the budget.
Now, the Minister of Finance, Indrajit, recently, when posed a question from a journalist regarding the budget 2022, he says very clearly, there is nothing to give. Everything about 2022 would be about taking. What does this mean to the rural masses of Sri Lanka? What does this mean to the private sector in the country? What does it mean to investor confidence in the country? Does it show a negative or an amber signal to them at the moment?
Well, I think what you have said was the truth. This has always been the budget. The budget is always about revenue collections. And where you get these revenues, as I said earlier, it has to come from people. Government on its own does not earn a single cent. It has to be pocketed from people, then which we call taxation. And this taxation can come in a number of different ways. So what the finance minister said is not politically very conducive, I would say, but it's a fact of life.
Indrajit, are you trying to tell me that people should not have any expectations about a goods package from budget 2022? Because right now the country's economy is in dire straits. We know all. Every one of us know the situation of the country's economy at the moment. We are in a dire situation at present. Can we expect a basket of goods from the government at least this year? At least to make sure that we revive the country's economy, to move forward, to get something in return? Can we expect that from the government 2022 budget?
I think that there is a wrong expectations on the budget. Very often, in the past, we are talking about what we call transfers to people, welfare packages to people. But the downside of this particular expectation is what we see for the last 70 years. We are still struggling as a developing economy. Now, if we are talking about giveaways through the budget, then we are hitting up the wrong gum tree. We have to be realistic. The second point of this particular context is, I think everywhere in the world now, under COVID, budgets are all over the place. It's not here only. Even the mighty US, they have the same issue. So when we say what is to be expected from the budget at this particular context here is, it has several issues. One is Sri Lanka has historical perennial problems with regard to the management of the budget and the management of the economy. So that's one thing that is hitting us very badly. Second, from a day-to-day point of view, our revenue collections are at the lowest because businesses are not doing very well. And at the same time, our expenditures are rising because there are so many people who are out of jobs and people have to be supported. So the expenditure side is, so basically the budget is, the last year's budget was almost about 11.5% of GDP, which is very, very high. Yeah, so I don't think this year's budget is going to be much different as well.
If you look at the numbers on the 7th October appropriation bill that was tabled by Finance Minister Basil Rajapaksa, Defence Ministry has been allocated 373.1 billion for the year 2022, the highest as far as the sectors are concerned. Now, this is alarming, isn't it?
It is.
That's a big number.
Absolutely.
That doesn't mean that the people have to be held responsible for it. The respective government should be held responsible for it because they are the ones who are forming the budget at the end of the day, isn't it? Why are you pointing the finger at the people saying they have to tighten their bills? It has always been the people. And why not advise the government to take strict action, take stringent measures, make sure there is no wastage, make sure there is no corruption? Isn't that the responsibility of the government in power?
I think what you said, I can't disagree. I totally agree with you with regard to, it's not just the budget. There are so many things that come along with this whole the process. Now, when it comes to defense expenditure, from economic point of view, defense expenditure is, if you just take it on the face value of it, it's not constructive expenditure because it doesn't create anything. It's not something to add to the production. In the past, we had justifications why the defense budget should be maintained at a certain level. But whether we could afford to have the same level of expenditure commitments is not something I can explain. Maybe the government can explain why it is there, but at the same time, in the crisis situation where the forces and the whole teams have been of a great value to the country, that has to be accepted as well. But the question is whether you need that level of expenditure to maintain a set of forces so that we will always have them in a ready position when there is a crisis.
Thank you very much. Indrajit Aponzo, Senior Lecturer, Department of Economics, University of Colombo. I now move my attention to Dr. Andre Kanayaka, economist and former chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. Dr. Ekanayake, because tonight our topic is discussing about the budget 2022 as well as the country's economy, I want to direct a question to you with regard to the country's economy right at the start to get some direction as far as the first round is concerned. Now, we are all aware that the central bank took very stringent measures on Friday requiring the repatriation of export proceeds into Sri Lanka and conversion on or before the 7th day of the succeeding month for the exporters of the country. Now, based on the reports that have been issued by the Asia and Pacific Policy Society thus far, they've said that Sri Lanka should look at an export-oriented and private investment-led growth model if they are to move forward in this situation at the moment, the precipice in which the country's economy is at. If that case be the scenario, why did the central bank give us such a negative picture for the exporters to repatriate their currencies? This shows a negative amber signal to any investor who is willing to come to Sri Lanka and invest money as well. Now, I don't understand the government's logic here. Explain to me.
Tough call, but let me first thank Face the Nation program for inviting me to be here tonight. In order to respond to your question, I have to sort of quickly sketch the situation we are in right now with regard to the economy. A very superficial look at the economy compared to the previous year tells you that it might recover what was lost during the year 2020, last year, because last year the economy recorded a degrowth of about 3.3%. This year it looks like, if everything goes well, a growth of around that much can be achieved, and that's what you call a classic V-shaped recovery. Now, that's good news, but the problem is whether the growth rates can be sustained. And the biggest problem the nation faces right now is the dollar crunch. As per the latest data of the central bank from the weekly report of 5th of November, we see that the gross official reserves are just over $2 billion US. That's a little more than 1 month's import requirements. Usually when reserves fall below 3 months import requirements, a warning light starts flashing that you are in danger zone. So you can imagine when we have only 1 month. But a lesser known fact also is that the central banks, the jargon is monetary authorities, net foreign asset position is now negative to the tune of several $100 million US. So now that leads to the answer we have to look forward to your question. It is said that there is this saying that desperate times call for desperate measures. And that's the way I see it. If we know that the dollar crunch is so bad that the importers for essential consumption and for essential industrial inputs are queuing up at their banks in order to get the currency for their imports.
So, Dr. Ekanayake, you spoke about the banks. What is the situation for banks, like commercial banks in Sri Lanka, which provide services to non-residents outside Sri Lanka, where profits are retained currently in USD? Will they also be subjected to the same gazetting question?
not clear. Not clear. We need to know, because all those who are, all the resident companies and who operate businesses here in Sri Lanka obviously will be subject to those rules. But companies which operate in, are registered and operate in different jurisdictions, which may have Sri Lankan owners, it should be different. Probably Mr. Gajendran will be able to explain it better. My sense is that, but the point is all those are clarifications which the central bank ought to give.
So, Dr. Ekanayake, does this mean the Central Bank of Sri Lanka is trying to promote the establishment of offshore accounts for the top exporters in the country?
Well, the indirect, or rather the effect of this measure can be that, because why would an exporter or when you say exporter, merchandise or service would be keen to bring the earnings back when the exchange rate is overvalued. It is official rate is 203 rupees per dollar, and it is very well known that the unofficial market it trades at around 230 or so. So why would a person will be in a hurry to bring money back here? Now that explains why, leave alone the exporters. Look at what happened to the remittances. From about March this year, remittances have been falling very sharply, so that by during the month of August and September, actually in September, the monthly remittances was just about half what it was during the prior year. So leave alone businesses, the migrant workers are not sending money through the formal channels. That explains.
So, Dr. Ekanayake, can we say right now that Sri Lanka is in a crisis and the government has failed to take appropriate action to reverse the situation which we are at present?
I would be a little more generous towards the government, because this is a problem which has been brewing for a long time.
No, however, Dr. Ekanayake, because you're saying that you need to be generous with the government, the remarks that you're making, if you look at the foreign reserves that Sri Lanka had by the year 2019, it stood at 7.5 billion. Now, you just mentioned that it's hovering around 2.1 billion US dollars and 2.2 billion US dollars, which is equivalent to 1 month of imports. If that case be the scenario, who should be held responsible? Is it the public?
Of course, no, the government is responsible. Unfortunate thing is there's no clear solution to the problem. The problem is so large. Now, during the next, from the current next 12 months, right? From now for the next 12 months, according to the central bank data, the loan debt service requirement is about $6.7 billion. And it will be so for the next 3-4 years, at least a minimum of $5 billion to go out. That's a massive amount for a $80, $82, $83 billion economy, right? And what it means is this: it is taking away, we are sending away money which would have been available for investment in Sri Lanka and for consumption by Sri Lankans. That's what we're doing. 7-8% of the GDP, right, goes out of the nation for debt service. But why did it happen? It happened because for 70 years, we did two wrong things. We ran high budget deficits, and we also ran high trade deficits and balance of payment deficits. So now overnight it cannot be reversed. It's not possible because the number is so large, but it doesn't justify some of the measures which are being taken right now. The point I want to make is the magnitude of the problem is so large, it has been created over such a long period of time, whether this government or any other government cannot reverse it in a year or two.
All right, thank you very much. Dr. Anureka Nayaka, economist and former chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. At the end of the day, the people can't be held responsible for the incompetence of the governance structure in the country. Having said that, we now move to N.R. Gajendran, a tax specialist. Nice to have you on board, Gajendran, again on Face the Nation. Dr. Ekanayaka spoke about drastic measures that need to be taken when the situation arises, and you have to be able to compete with the situation when the country is heading along. And that is why the government had to take such a drastic measure. I want to start off with the Spider-Man quote, which says, "Great power, with great power comes great responsibility." Does the president in any way think that he is leading a revolution and not leading a country?
Samira, if you permit me to first discuss the two important and striking issues that you have raised.
Right.
That is one on the budget reformulation
and the central bank
the foreign currency,
yeah.
And of course the third one, what you mentioned now.
Yeah.
Budgetary formulation is a very deep-rooted matter. It flows from the policy of the government. And there are two fundamentals, I'm sure the economists can expand it further, in formulation of budget. And if you don't get it right, those fundamental issues, we will be in position like we are in. It is not related to only this government, but as mentioned, successive governments have done this. First one is the budget has to be efficient. What does efficiency mean? The budget should self-sustain itself, like any company's budget or individual's budgets. That is, the budget should raise adequate amount of revenue. There are 3 or 4 or 5 sources of revenue or funds to meet its expenditure. Why is the government needing money to take on the expenditure? Because the people have felt and the governments have felt there are certain expenditure like public utilities, provision of given goods for basic people who are living below the poverty net.
The Samruddhi beneficiaries, the fund, for an example, or the Mahapala scheme.
Cannot be met through their own generation of wealth, and you can't help the principle of percolating down. You build a private sector, all will benefit that fund, they go in for redistribution. So you raise revenue to meet your budgetary requirements. Then when you go to raising of revenue, then the second fundamental principle comes that it has to be equitous. That is, the principle of capacity to pay should be followed in raising of revenue. Because the people who have the capacity to pay should pay the taxes, so that to be given, it's not doling out monies to the less privileged people or to the magnitude who don't have the means. Because of no fault of theirs, they have been born poor, they didn't have so many facilities, and because you give them the opportunities with those expenditures. So if you don't get these two right, the two fundamental concepts of budgetary formulation, you will go into a terrible mess like any government will go into. And when it comes to expenditure side, There are expenditures which have to be managed. There are striking expenditures, whether you are living beyond your means with salary payments, then the second one is interest, and there are other expenditures coming. So these are strong discipline has to be maintained. You can run deficit budgeting because for intended limited purpose, but you can't have run huge budgets deficit.
10% to 12% of the GDP at the end of the day, which is quite significant.
And these are not deficits run for 1 or 2 years because of COVID. It has been run successfully because it has been a fallacy. And when you can't meet the sources of revenue and there is no forbearance of revenue, then what happens to meet the expenditure? You have the famous thing of printing money, right? So if you are not prepared to, if this is not the answer, there must be some other answers for this. You can't, if you are not prepared to have the discipline in budgetary formulation and take the call, we can't blame anything else, right? So we will have to blame whoever, and the question of accountability. The second one is, you want anything on the clarify on that?
No, I will ask you a question on the clarification on that. Let's quickly move on
to the other one.
To the
second point is on the mandatory conversion of foreign currency and the invoking of Section 68 of the Monetary Act, which has happened for the first time in this country. I believe someone has to correct me, right? If you see the Gazette, it refers to Section 10C and Section 68 of the Monetary Act. Now, there again, if you go to the fundamentals, generally I'm a basic man, you go to the fundamentals, generally you take care of the facts, the solutions will find its own way. Now see the foreign exchange, the crisis or the deficit. See what are the sources of revenue? Exports, about $1 billion a month, right? Say you have 12 billion for the year.
Yeah, so the EDB is expecting the number to hit around 15.72 billion by the end of 2021.
Yes. So you say, but at the moment...
This is what the EDB says, because they say the first 9 months have achieved 11.1 billion in 2021.
Yeah.
The next few months would get us to 15.72 billion.
Yeah, so you achieved that, say, right? But the general estimate is average is $1 billion a month.
Yeah.
Right? Merchandise. And this year there is no remittances from tourism. Then the other one is inward remittances from expat staff or the people who are working abroad, which are generally $4, $5, $6 million a month. As Dr. Anurag Kunanga said, it dropped down to half. So you say 11, 12 plus another 3, 4, 5, 6 billion, it's about 18. Okay, you push it, it's 20 billion. It's a total inflows for a year. I'm just taking the overall numbers. Then the second one is the imports. First 6 months of this year, we had 10 billion imports. And second 6 months, that is with all COVID measures and restrictions, so another 10, or another 1 or 2, 22. Then we had to repay anything between $4.5 to $6-7 billion debt repayment. So you have an inflow of 16, 18, maximum 20 billion, right? And we have an outflow of anything from 22, 26, 27 billion, 28 billion. So there is a deficit of anything from $5 to $10 billion. So this amount we are unable to recoup or fill this gap through sources. Then what have you done because of that? You have tried all the measures, you brought import restrictions, and now whether you go and say it's a mandatory conversion of of foreign currency. The first question is Section 68, if you read this section, this is only a policy statement and method to be adapted, and also report to the finance minister, what are the issues and what is the recommendation. Now you go and make a mandatory conversion like this, whether we will achieve the purpose. Whether we will achieve the purpose. Immediately you will achieve the purpose, and see what are the consequences about this. Now all these merchandise exporters who have large exporters here, they have parallel factories and businesses outside the country. We will come to the non-resident resident issue on this, right? They will smart. If they are not grumbling, they will know, they will reroute their businesses, right? Even service providers, they should have never touched the service providers, because the service providers doesn't use any foreign dollars to produce their services. And our Foreign Exchange Act grants permission for anyone to hold foreign currency if you earn the foreign currency wherever they may want to hold it, right? And if you are telling them not only to bring the money, mandatory convert. And if it's a temporary problem, your conversion should be temporary. You are losing your foreign currency. If I can understand, if you told the service providers, I will convert it for 6 months and give it back to you with interest, there is this thing. If you are not in a bankrupt situation and this is a liquidity crisis, you can't bring and tell the real the smarter ones. Services you can never trace, Samira, right? So if they want, they will hold the monies outside. So only the smaller guys and the sincere, genuine guys and who've placed all the faith in Sri Lanka will get affected. So this other question is, this applies to a resident who earns foreign currency, right? So if you are a resident, so if I stay in Sri Lanka and earn this money, I will have to bring it wherever it is. Even if I go out and do, and if basically for the exchange law, the residency for individual is 6 months in the country. Company is incorporated in Sri Lanka is a resident. Company incorporated outside Sri Lanka, non-resident. That is the basic principle.
Yes.
So if you are in company incorporated in Sri Lanka, if you are having a branch outside Sri Lanka, if you are doing that through the branch, then there may be, under this one, there is an obligation for you to bring in and convert it within 7 days. So what they will do is they will form companies outside and go out of this story. And because people are also smart, no?
And the FDIs, and the FDIs.
And the other thing, FDIs, who will come?
Who will come?
Total incorrect message, no? If they say, look here, we have a problem, if that is the case, we'll convert, give it back, help us with interest. And the central bank did it before.
Gajendra, that is why I asked you my early question to you.
Before. Yeah. When they wanted to encourage, they gave when they gave and put in dollars, they even earlier they said they gave $2% more interest rate. And when the people converted into rupees, they gave an extra.
That is why I'm asking you this question, posing this question to you. Does the president feel that he is leading a revolution? Or does he feel that he is governing a country or leading a country, leading the countrymen? What does he feel?
I don't know his feeling, but from what he says, he strongly believes that he is leading a revolution, and which is not a military revolution. I think he is convinced that he is leading a revolution, and this is the way forward, right? And I don't know whether there is impolitic advice which has been extended to him, right? Injudicious advice has been given to him, and whether he has taken it. He seems to be very modest, and he is very convinced in saying that he may be convinced, and the government may be convinced that they are on the right track, and this is the way forward. But substantive reasoning and justifications have not been given in that sense. So there is obligation for the technocrats who are supporting these things to come and say, of course, we cannot encourage sophistry and chicanery, but apart from that, there is a justification to be, there is a feeling that they are on the right track, and that is their conviction.
Right, thank you very much, N.R. Gajendran, tax specialist. I open the floor for questions from our journalists. On to my immediate right is Azra Hassan, who's the manager of English News at Newsfirst, and then I have Hassan Shazuli as well, who's a very young budding journalist. So Hassan, with your permission, Let's start off with the lady, right? Yeah, okay. Azra.
Thank you, Shamir. I'll pose my first question to Mr. Ponsu. Recently, just yesterday, Trade Minister was speaking to the media and he said that all countries are facing the same fate because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And he even mentioned countries like the United States are going through the same thing. But if you look at the progress made by the US, they're actually coming out of the pandemic and they're no longer bringing the excuse of the pandemic just to convince themselves that there's something wrong. If you think that it's unfair to compare with US, if you take the Maldives, when Moody's downgraded Sri Lanka, Fitch Ratings, on the other hand, gave an upgrade to the Maldives. So it seems like every country is moving forward despite these challenges that we're facing. And how come our authorities are still hung up on the fact that COVID-19 pandemic, the one that struck us 2 years ago, is still causing us troubles? What is your stance on that?
I think there is a lot of political talk going on, and the ministers and various guys telling various things which are unrelated. And as I listen to these gentlemen as well, I think this country has a fundamental question, fundamental issue. That issue is our trade balance. We have been living on a deficit trade balance. Let me just explain what a trade balance is. Trade balance is where we make the income and expenditures on the foreign account. If we run a negative trade balance, that means we are living beyond our means historically and habitually. And that happened from 1977 onwards. We had a negative trade balance. And when it comes to 2019, we had the rock bottom of the trade balance with $11.5 billion. Okay? Now, what does it mean? It means you are short of $11.5 billion. And when you have $11.5 billion, how did we finance this? We had these poor guys who are in the Middle East sending us $7.5 billion, and that sort of shortened the pressure to about $4.5 billion. So then we had to sort of work out this $4.5 billion through loans. Now we have been doing this happily all along. Now COVID, what the COVID did was, it really exposed us completely that this scenario is not going to work anymore. And when that happened, because what we did was we had loans and we borrow more to pay up those loans. And second thing is, when we exhausted our concessionary loans facilities which we had been enjoying for many decades, then we went to the private markets, which we call international sovereign bonds. That's where we hit the real rock bottom, because they are 5-year tenor. When you turn around, you have to pay that bond. Now what happened was, we have been going on with that, and when after COVID hit, we suddenly exhausted that line. Now the question is, all these problems we have at the moment zeroes into that particular issue. And even the foreign exchange problems we have, restrictions we have, all that are directly connected to that. So what we see what we discuss are symptoms of the problem, but that's not the problem. The problem is the chronic issue of trade balance. How do we solve this? The only way to solve this is, we should produce things that we can produce locally. That means we bring down the import bill, which we have been importing literally anything and everything. Second, we have to have export growth.
So let's, Indrajit, let's talk about a classic scenario, really, what the government did. The government stopped importing turmeric. And as a result, the country had to be self-sufficient with turmeric, so on and so forth. Recently, the president addressing an event in Colombo very clearly articulates, guess what I did? I have made Sri Lanka self-sufficient from turmeric. how much is 100 grams of turmeric in the local market?
450 rupees.
600 rupees, Indrajit.
Yeah, I think it has gone up.
It has gone up.
It has gone up.
It was at 1,200 rupees initially.
That's right.
Now it's at, who can have turmeric in their food in the rural markets of Sri Lanka? Tell me a family that can afford 100 grams of turmeric, who are living in a dwelling that has been provided by the government. How can they afford 100 grams of turmeric at 600 rupees right now in this market? Because the government decided that they will restrict imports as far as turmeric is concerned. One classic example.
Okay, my answer is this way. I think what you said was absolutely true. Turmeric has basically gone out of the market, and when it came back, it became a kind of a very expensive commodity, which requires the security guarding as well, you know, in a supermarket, you know. So it was like very expensive commodity. Now, I think, you know, that's a kind of a price we pay because we have gone on a track where we basically sort of disregarded the possibilities that we could do here. So turmeric, with regard to turmeric, what President says, I honestly, what I see is most of the politicians do talk things in a fragmented, very things that are very politicized. I don't look at that way. I don't look at that way. What I'm trying to say is this: as you rightly said, turmeric is expensive, but there's a much bigger problem in this country has. Okay, the answer is import turmeric, which you could do from India at 1/10 the cost. Okay, but then just extrapolate this to everything that we could do. We can buy it from India, we can buy it from China. That's what we have been doing.
No, Indrajit, the point is, I don't know whether Dr. Ekanayaka and Gajendran would agree with this analogy that has been made on Face the Nation by many economists. We have to drive the country towards exports. That is what is important. It's nothing else. If we are to come out of this crisis, we have to increase our 15 billion export turnover at the moment of US dollars to at least 20 billion.
Absolutely.
If that case be the scenario, just imagine the CB's latest mandatory conversion rule of overregulation that has been dubbed as from the exporters. Does that help?
Okay, I think, you know, let's get this issue from a holistic point of view. Now, we can always look at it from a fragmented point, but look at it a holistic point of view. Exports, that's the most desirable thing. Why did we miss the bus? When everybody else who had come later than Sri Lanka had been exporting. Vietnam, Cambodia, even Malaysia came later than us. South Korea came later than us. What happened? Because we have adopted a set of policies. Just saying export, it's not going to work. Exports require a certain kind of policies. Okay, let's take the comparison. When Mahinda Rajapaksa regime that was ousted in 2014, we had a certain amount of exports. Well, of course, they never had the emphasis on export. They were on a different plateau altogether for economic growth, but not on trade balance, not on exports.
They were worried about extending that union office. That's
right, okay, so let's... But then comes to the next regime, which was a free trade regime. People said, look, it has to be competitive and this and that. What happened to our exports? If the exports did well, don't blame because we had trouble between us. No, that's not the issue. There was a basic fundamental problem. The policy was mislocated. And we ended up with 11 billion deficit in the trade sector. Okay? Well, we had a good time with imports where everything was cheap. But we were heading towards an absolute disaster.
Indrajit, that is the reason that when we are earning 1.5 billion US dollars from the tea industry in Sri Lanka, all the exporters in the tea industry are saying, protect this business. Give us the fertilizer needed to the country. Make sure that the tea goes from 1.5 billion to $2 billion industry. What has happened today, Indrajit? Today when you go to the Colombo tea auction to buy teas, the teas are grey. You can't match the international standard that we have been maintaining for years. The pure Ceylon quality is no more at the Colombo tea auction. Why? Because of the government's haphazard decision to ban chemical fertilizer without even knowing whether the fertilizer is effective or not to the tea crop. They banned chemical fertilizer to rubber. Are we eating rubber? You tell me, Indrajit, is this the way to move forward?
No, wait, I think we are mixing up two different policies.
No, we are talking about
let me explain. First one, with regard to exports, we were exporting tea. What else do we export? We export apparel. What else do we export? Those are all Spodian things. We never had a major export other than apparel. The only creative export we have is apparel. Tea, in fact, tea doesn't have the capacity to go beyond 2 billion, 3 billion. It's basically stuck at a particular level. Garments came up to about 6.5 billion, 7 billion. But why did we miss?
No, I don't agree with you when you
say.
It's
not an agreement. It's about the facts of life. So that means we have not diversified our exports. We have not been able to be competitive in the exports. And how did we get garments? Because government supported garment sector. I think what we should have had was not free trade, not open economy. We should have had a system where we have driven other sectors.
So Dr. Ekanayake, you've been the chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce in the period of 2008 and 2009. Now, Indrajit is of the opinion that the tea export market cannot be grown from that 1.5 billion mark. However, exporters in Sri Lanka of the opinion, on the ground of the opinion, if the tea industry is liberalized in Sri Lanka, make the tea industry liberalized, have a hub in the Hambantota port or Colombo port, and mix or give the opportunity for exporters to blend tea operations, this could be taken up to around $4 billion industry. Now, this is what the exporters are saying, major scale exporters. Because of the selfishness of 2 or 3 exporters in Sri Lanka, the country's tea industry is not being liberalized. Look at countries like Kenya. They are doing extremely well at the moment. 60 million kilos out of a nation that was not talking about tea before. Look at Jebel Ali for an instance. Exporting and blending tea operations, getting more revenue than Sri Lanka, which is supposed to be the hub. We are the biggest exporter of tea in the world. What has happened?
Yeah, I think there's no simple answer. If you ask me, can the tea industry be grown 2 times, 3 times, 4 times from what it is? I believe you can. That's the short answer. But the devil is in the details. So that's where we should go. Indrajit, in fact, alluded to it very clearly. The policy framework, right? Just the mere rhetoric of promoting exports is not going to result in higher exports. A whole range of macroeconomic and also industry-specific policies have prevented not only the tea industry, even garment industry to grow beyond what it is now, and for many other industries to come up. Take the exchange rate policy. But allow me to go a little back so that we understand the context fully. I need to correct Indrajit for the sake of record. Sri Lanka ran significant budget deficits, to my recollection, since the 1950s, early 50s. Sri Lanka also ran significant trade deficits from mid-1950s. I'm emphasizing that because we have been nurturing a habit of living beyond our means. Now, Gajendran explained, I want to elaborate a little more. When you have trade deficit and when you have budget deficit, how do you bridge the gap? Two things happen. One is you borrow one way or the other from abroad to bridge the gap. The other is within Sri Lanka, government borrows from the public. That is what is called printing money, right? You issue certificates, treasury bills, bonds, and the banks, primarily in Sri Lanka it's banks and some high net worth individuals come and buy them. So they are loans, right? This is how the deficits have been financed over the years. Problem with that is they pile up, right? A fundamental thing in an economy is the economy has to grow at a faster rate than the rate at which the debt compounds. You know, if the economy doesn't grow, right, like, you know, you borrow for things which doesn't give you an income, right, then what happens is the debt piles up. And then when it comes to an unfortunate thing about financial markets is until the going is good, they are ever willing to give you the loans, right? Of course, the risk margin goes up, you know, little by little by little by, and it becomes expensive, but you can still get money. But what happened to Sri Lanka is when the taxes amounting to around 400 billion rupees a year were taken away, suddenly the financial markets had big doubts as to whether Sri Lanka can finance debts any further. And that's why the ratings started deteriorating. Once the ratings start deteriorating, you can't generate sufficient interest at reasonable rates to borrow from the market. So, you know, that avenue was shut.
But the governor of the central bank, Dr. Ekanaka, was crossed with these rating agencies, saying that they are taking revenge from the country.
Yeah, that's his view. The problem is rating agencies are there all over the world. Rating agencies look at the economy according to a particular model that has certain metrics according to which they look at what is the capacity of an economy to pay back the loans when the due date arises.
Dr.
And,
Ekanaka,
you know,
sorry
markets
to interrupt.
cannot be dictated by a government. No, these are global markets. Even the local market cannot be dictated by the government. We saw it in terms of failed price control efforts. It can't be
But
done.
after the appointment of the new governor, it seems like the central bank has stopped printing money. But so far this year, we have printed 722 billion. So are we does it mean that we're moving in the right direction, or is it too late now?
No, I mean, it's better late than never. So it's still a positive move, and as a result, there appears to be a correction in the interest rate in the domestic market. Now the treasury bill rate has gone up, bank rates are inching up, deposit rates are also rising. So that's in the right direction.
So, Doctor, what I'm trying to understand is even at the treasury bill auctions, whatever we offer is accepted. And if you take the stock market, we record all-time highs almost every day. And we see these big companies having massive market capitalizations and stuff. But when you see those things on television, on the news, and when you're at home watching the news and you can't afford a cylinder of gas, one might think something is wrong somewhere, because a certain part seem to be earning quite well when the normal people like us are struggling on a daily basis. So what's the fix there?
See, that's the reality. Some people are doing well. I mean, look at income
So majority
distribution
are
and wealth
suffering
distribution.
while a very limited crowd is doing good.
Yes, doing extremely well, and that is one of the key problems of this economy.
So it is like the survival of the fittest. As long as you're fit enough to run, you can.
Right.
Everyone else will have to stay back.
Yeah.
But that's unfair. I mean, why do we appoint authorities? Indrajit earlier pointed out that we shouldn't pay too much attention to what these politicians are saying. But the central bank governor was a politician 2 months ago and now he's making decisions. So how can we just disregard those statements when they have been appointed to a certain position to make decisions, these policies and all sorts of things? So I don't understand.
Can I
No,
respond?
let me
Sorry.
let me continue a little more. See, the point is, these are the symptoms of a disease, right? The disease is a long drawn out thing, right? I would say 70 years old now, right? It's unfortunate that us, those who know about these things, and also you all, the media, have not shared this with sufficient clarity and in simple terms to the general public. So the myth created in the minds of the general public has been that their job is to elect leaders who will look after them and give them goodies. Whether it is on borrowings or not, you are not worried. See, so there's this big disconnect. There's responsibility all around, right? And we also have, remember, we have what is called a representative democracy. So what have we done for 70 odd years, 72, 73 years? We elect a group of people and let them do anything they want until the next election. I'm simplifying, right? Now clearly there's a big problem with that form of democracy, and that's why it is necessary to begin to adopt ways of, participatory democracy, where people can even midway, right, introduce changes, bring in new proposals and force the system to adopt them, or when the governments are doing the wrong thing, to stop them. So these are things which can be done. Unfortunately, the disconnect, there is such a disconnect.
So people take to, I'll move to Mr. Gajendran, people take to the streets. We see farmers protesting, we see teachers teaching the normal hours, and after school they are at the agitation site protesting. So they are trying to communicate a certain message to the government. But what seems like is that the government is letting the teachers to protest or the farmers to protest and wait till they get exhausted and just give up. So even when the people are taking responsibility, taking charge and trying to communicate something to the government or these authorities, nobody seems to care. They just move on with their own way of doing things.
Basically, I don't think any government all intention will do sort of stupid, arrogant things. As I said, I think there is a strong feeling, and I strongly believe in that. The authorities who are making decisions or who are advising to make these decisions, many people might think it's injudicious and it's out of point. But they seem to be convinced in the way forward, because even with all things happening, they are reluctant to make any corrective decisions. If they feel if they are going on the wrong path, they will make corrective decision. Maybe they have made one slight decision, maybe in the tea industry, where they have permitted now to use, I believe, chemical fertilizers for the tea industry in some form or other. So, and also there may be a belief that and strong conviction that people are still with the government, and all these protests, or substantially these protests, are motivated and initiated by politics.
So we have a question from one of our viewers, Gajendran. It's for you. The question is from one-time SEMA president, Mr. Angelo Patrick. So he wants to pose a question to you. So the question is, we have presented respective budgets for the past 70 years. Has any minister told us how we are progressively faring in its implementation? Now take a private company for an example. A private company CEO is responsible with regard to his performance month in, month after against the budget, and you are held accountable for it. Who is accountable for the non-performance of the national budget? Hence, do our national budgets serve any purpose if no one is held accountable?
Very good question, a very fair question. If you see that with the budget, there is a lot of excitement just before the budget, and even greater excitement after the budget. But no excitement whatsoever when the budgets are passed and the laws are made, because there is always a gap, I say, from what is pronounced and what is enacted, and thereafter what is implemented. So really, if you want to see, to hold someone accountable, you must have a sort of a scientific based and research people to formulate budgets. You know, I have been always saying these things. There must be a think tank, research based decisions to be made, because these are two even policy making, these fundamental issues. Then thereafter what happens is, people have to be accountable, and accountability has to be brought through legislation. Because if you see in other countries, when there is a slight chance of a failure, even in good governance, I'll tell you, a few years ago, when I was in Australia, the New South Wales Premier, he was doing so well, and the province was doing so well, he had to resign because there was a wine bottle given to him as a gift, $2,000 wine bottle. The offense was not that he shouldn't have taken it. The offense was that he didn't disclose it.
Mr. Gajendran, just a
So now there only the accountability starts.
Gajendran, you are talking about scientific methods and all that. I can remember how respective governments came into power saying that they will appoint ministerial portfolios on a scientific method. And what did they do? They appointed the Minister of Highways and Minister of Higher Education jointly. Then now look at the cabinet portfolios that we have and the non-cabinet portfolios we have. It's laughable.
Yeah, if there is no accountability, you will get.
You're talking about scientific methods. Do you think in a country like Sri Lanka, will we ever be able to do something concrete and positive like that?
Otherwise, we'll get this.
Mr. Gajendran, I think picking up on where Shamil left in terms of making scientific decisions and then obtaining the opinion of experts while making decisions, I think you might remember that the government reformed its tax policy soon after it came into power. It introduced new taxes, and one of it was the advanced personal income tax. In 2020, you had told the local newspaper that it was a relief for taxpayers because they would have to voluntarily pay the tax. So the advanced personal income tax replaced the pay tax, the pay as you earn tax. And now this is costing us 150 million rupees in revenue losses annually. Do you think that that was the right decision? Don't you think that the government could have made a better decision at that time?
In withdrawing the PAY taxes?
Yes. Because it's 150 million rupees. I mean, nowadays people are finding it hard to survive. That's quite a lot of money, isn't it?
No, the withholding taxes, and especially the PAY form of withholding tax, the ubiquitous form of tax which is found everywhere, right? But I'll tell you the negativities of the withholding taxes before we go into the good and bad of it. Withholding tax is a top line tax, whether it is ESC, payment at the initial stage or any other withholding tax, before you earn, it is being withheld. So when it is withholding tax, in the case of PAYE employees, they were unfairly and unjustly affected from the word go. Other than the top-rung people who didn't want to have a file and they preferred these withholding taxes, the small people were badly affected by it. Because all the others pay taxes quarterly, why should only the PAY guy pay taxes monthly? All others pay quarterly. Right? PAY gets, and he has no decision to make a decision whether the taxes what is paid is the correct amount or not.
Don't you think there could have been stronger laws to make sure that the taxes were collected instead of proposing a system which results in loss of revenue?
Yeah, but I am not a supporter of withholding taxes in principle, because even other taxes, because the withholding agent, you are placing a lot of faith and confidence in the withholding agents. Large established institutions can be even interest banks and finance. If they don't withhold, there have been, when government agents are the withholding agents, they withhold and they don't remit the money. And still the person whom the tax has been withheld has to pay the tax in spite of the money, in fact it has been withheld. So you don't trust the taxpayer and you are going and trusting the withholding agent who is a statutory agent. But then if you are going away into this system, if you have a proper system of like what we are calling a revenue administration system, you are unable to implement it because the revenue officers are against it. Because because they are against the system, because malpractice is when technology takes into place, malpractice. So with technology now, connectivity now, you don't need to have withholding taxes. You can connect and find out who is the person getting what is the amount of tax. Right? So we can say withholding taxes abolished, whether it's a bad thing. It's a sign of inefficiency of the tax system.
But do you think, Indrajit, Budget 2022, the speech that would be made by the incumbent Finance Minister Basil Rajapaksa, the brother of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa and Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa, would bring forth a taxation system to net the high net worth individuals in the country?
You know, on the principle of capacity to pay, high net worth on the capacity to, you have to bring in taxes to get on the not only individuals, but I would say more on the corporate levels. See, some of the corporates are making, billions of profits. And if you see, because of this pandemic and conditions, the bigger companies are getting bigger and bigger, and the SMEs are getting wiped out. So there must be some form of tax on these large corporates also on the capacity to pay. Now there some companies are, its capacity to pay has to be done, right? But that doesn't mean there should be capital taxes. I don't say there is capital taxes like estate duty, wealth tax,
capital gain tax.
Capital gains tax, there is income being generated in capital gains tax, income. But I am saying wealth taxes, capital form of taxes, death duties, then you are taxing capital. You can't bring it, but then you have to have sources of revenue. Basically, government, for them to spend or give relief to the people, you have to collect from the people. No, they don't bring money from there.
But Gajendra, you saw this the statement that was made by Ajit Nimad Kabral, the governor of the central bank. He is very clearly articulating that just because you print money, inflation doesn't rise in the country.
Yeah, there is a theory where you print money, and
that's the modern monetary theory.
No, modern monetary theory, you continue printing money, but here what you are saying is you print money and you lock it up, right? Where you call that, they call it sterilization. You incarcerate the money, you print the money. It's like you have money, you don't put it into circulation. It's
but the monetary base still gets expanded, no?
No, you don't put it in. Then the question is, why are you increasing the stock of money in the form of deposits and notes and other things and locking it up? because you want to release it when you want to release it. When you print money, now for example, government salaries is about 1 trillion, right? Our total revenue for 2020 was only 1.2 or 1.3 trillion. So when you don't have tax money to collect from the people and give it, what you do? You have to print and give money, no? So you can print and put it into circulation, you don't. So, but if you are keeping it ready, because process of printing may be this thing. So there is, when he says this time, at that time, he may have said, look here, I have printed, but it's not, I have not increased the circulation.
So, Indrajit, interestingly, I'm just going through the appropriation bill that was presented to the Parliament on the 7th of October by the Minister of Finance, Basil Rajapaksa. Increase the organic fertilizer allocation is financed by reductions in the budgets of minor agri-ministries. So, actually, the Agriculture Ministry expenditure has not increased, despite the fact the government wants to move towards a organic farming model in the country. It's not the decisions that have been taken seems to be very illogical. Total expenditure allocation on education contracts by rupees 6 billion. Plantation related allocations far below the norm. Trade spending to be on par with 2020 levels, and tourism receives the lowest allocation in 5 years. Now, in your opening remarks, you said tourism needs a boost, but that has not happened.
What did I say?
Now, you said tourism needs a boost because of the revenue that has to be generated through US dollar terms, in USD terms. Because you spoke about the revenue that has been generated, and you said that from tourism, absolutely no money has come in because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Even so, tourism receives the lowest allocation in 5 years.
So, first of all, I never said that. Okay, but that's not the point.
Right.
The point here is that this this particular, say, you're mentioning about organic issue. I think, as I see, it's a total distraction which the government had got itself into. When you had some major problems on the table that needs addressing.
Example?
This shifting from fertilizer to organic fertilizer is not going to create additional growth here. It's not going to create additional dollars. And in fact, what the government has got itself into right now is, by going into this particular scenario, it has created more risk factors on the food supply, on the prices, and also on the acceptance of the rural community from shift from their usual fertilizer to organic fertilizer. So, as far as I see, that was a distraction, and that was undesirable distraction at this particular point of time, because we have much bigger issues which are moving targets all the time.
Distraction or wrong move?
It is this way. It is not a wrong move, but wrong strategy. In a sense, we should be doing it. If we are moving to organic fertilizer, let the market make it happen. Use the incentives to make it happen, and get people to shift over a period of time. You see, fertilizer and agriculture is not a profession. It's an anthropological practice. People have lived through this through generations. If you tell someone, look, do this, move from this to this, from a farmer's point of view, fertilizer is investment. They are investing on their field for an outcome that is going to take place on, say, few months down the road. And they don't have the backup plans. If something goes wrong, they're totally lost.
So this is not what you or I did, Indrajit. We were not even involved in this process.
Absolutely, because we are not part of the government.
We are not part of the government.
Right.
But we are indirectly stakeholders of the government, because
that is through the ballot. No?
Yeah, through the ballots.
From these fora, we are part of the stakeholders. Right?
So, yeah, so understood. So if that case be the scenario in question, the government's decision to ban fertilizer is not a distraction, is it?
Well, when I say distraction, what I mean is this. When this government came into power, fundamentally they did something right. They said, look, we will produce, we will try to push the local production as much as possible, because that's where our fundamental problem is. Our fundamental problem is we are importing 10 billion more than what we export. So we have a 10 billion deficit, and we don't have the ways of financing it. Even if we did finance, we're going to face it several years down the road again, because we are not going to get out of it. And it's getting inflated and inflated and inflated. We were living on a borrowed times.
Did you hear the speech that was made by President Gotabaya Rajapaksa recently?
Yep.
Did you see the aggression in the president's face when he said, I can hold the farmer from their neck and tell them to do this through the military, but I am not doing that? That's not a distraction.
Okay.
That seems like a threat to me.
Okay, when I said distraction, let me be a little more clearer here.
Yeah, be strong,
when
clear.
I said distraction from a policy perspective, it's not the nitty-gritty of how you translate it into words or anything. It's a distraction from the focus. The focus should have been for this government, and which is right, that you're going to bridge this gap. Of course, import control is a very painful thing for people, because we have been generations into imports. There are so many people who are living on imports, and we are used to various kinds of imports as well. So the shift is painful. And I would think that shift was done that way, not because of by choice. It was because we don't have cash. So that's one strategic decision, and which is not the right thing, which is not the favorable thing, but which is the only thing available on the table.
What would generate revenue in the year 2022 in terms of US dollars?
I beg your pardon?
What would generate revenue in the year 2022 in terms of US dollars for the country?
What you mean?
What sectors?
Exports.
Exports one.
Well,
foreign
it has to be exports.
It has to be exports.
It has to be export, nothing else.
Yeah.
It's not remittances, it's not anything else. It has to be exports. It has to be exports on production, or it has to be exports of services.
It
now,
can be FDIs also.
But FDIs, the problem with FDIs is that FDIs, well, of course, FDIs help us to create capacity, production capacity, if it is on the production side. But if it is something where, it's like, for example, not the FDIs really, other capital flows like to the stock market, which is as much as it comes, it goes out very quickly as well. And
so what happens, Indrajit, just to get myself accustomed to what you're trying to say. Let's take the garment industry for an example in Sri Lanka. 70% of the raw materials for the garment industry in Sri Lanka are coming from other nations. If we are to convert the US dollars the exporters are receiving by the 7th day of the month, how will the exporter have money to open LCs or open letter of credits to make purchases?
I think to answer to that question, Dr. Anurag Naikos, when you try to put in restrictions like this in a market economy, nothing works.
That is what we are trying to say. Nothing has worked with this government.
Well, it doesn't work. Now, you see, when you look at the price controls on rice, it didn't work. These are absolute nonsenses when you are in a globalized economy. The more you try to have controls, more it becomes a problem. And these are desperate measures. So if this government is to look for a solution, they have to look for a solution that will give you a medium-term space. I would imagine.
On that question,
yeah,
export proceeds could be used for your procurement before conversion. There are certain things that is allowed.
So 5 things are allowed in the...
Yeah, so what you are saying is included in that. Where the raw material, the inputs to import, you can use it. But earlier there was a situation where you had to, without looking into that requirement, you had to encash 25%.
Yeah, but let's take, Indrajit, for an example, the manufacturing industries in Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
Let's take maybe pipes or maybe anything else, manufacturing industry. Most of the raw materials are coming from overseas.
See, naturally, we are an importing country.
It's not a bad thing by itself. If you take China, that's the best example. It's the largest exporter in the world, and more than 70% of the inputs are coming from overseas, right? It's about the scale. Nothing wrong with getting imported inputs. Now, China is the world's biggest assembler.
Value addition and scale.
There are value chains. It comes into China. You assemble, but the scale is so big, the net you get out of that scale is large enough. So, what we require here in Sri Lanka is a policy environment which will encourage, right, large investments to take place and scale up our exports.
Dr. Ekanak, I want to understand your thinking now that we're talking about the economy. Can you think of 2 economic decisions that the current government has made that has actually shown results? Just 2 successful economic decisions.
You're asking me to...
I'm asking, can you think of 2 instances where the decisions...
what is in the memory are the failures, no? The failures are whenever the government tried to interfere with the market, it boomerangs, right? That's very clear. That is why price controls had to be withdrawn. It doesn't work. The moment you try to control prices, what happens? Shortages occur, queues form, and then people protest. Obviously, they have to protest, right? And then the government has to take a step back. So, I think the very large tax reliefs which were given in 2019, right, was given the context, it was a mistake, right? Secondly, all these attempts to control prices, they were mistakes, right? The trying to control the exchange rate and the interest rate both at the same time was a major mistake. So, I can list out the mistakes.
Mr.
Right?
Gajendra,
but the successes don't come to my mind because, media like you all also don't talk about the successes, so we don't come to here.
But Mr. Gajendran, are there any successes to talk about?
We like to talk about successes, Dr. Ekanak, as long as those successes are sustainable.
That's true. But I need to come back on one thing which Azra asked in the earlier round. I think both of you, and all 3 of you in some ways, were saying that what is the point, right? No one listens to us. But there are many reversals. All the price control things, there are reversals because they didn't work. And people protested. They protested loud and clear. And the media carried it.
And that hasn't made the situation any better, I think. That hasn't made the situation any better.
You see, with regard to prices, the only way you can control prices is to increase output. No? There is no other way. Right? If it's simple demand and supply, no one is going to sell below the cost of production. Cost of production includes the cost of capital and the return for your effort. So no one will do. The moment you try to bring the price below that, supply stops. And there's nothing a government can do about it. Not in Sri Lanka, not elsewhere. But there are other things government can do. If you had the right policy framework for sufficiently long period of time, you can, this hit we get from currency depreciation won't be there on imports.
So,
right?
Dr. Ekanak, I want to talk a little bit about this mandatory conversion rule and also about the need for Sri Lanka to go in for a debt restructuring plan at the moment. But I just want to stick on to this, the role of the Chamber of Commerce, because I can't hear a voice is being raised by the people, a voice is being raised by the media, But it seems the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, which is supposed to be the body, the backbone of the private sector in the country, silent.
I do not know whether they are entirely silent. I believe that they are making representations, but in the open fora, whether they are shouting or making the case strongly enough is a fair question. It's a fair question, but I'm sure they are making their representations to the authorities in the hope that they will understand and make changes. And you know, even in these remittance requirements, rather conversion requirements, there have been several changes. There have been about 4 different pronouncements, right?
Yeah, gazettes.
Right, and there have been changes.
Yeah.
So that is going on. But you see, I think a conversation like ours will be far more productive if we focus on the fundamentals, not the symptoms, right? Because there's nothing you can do about the symptoms. But if you address the fundamentals, then you can, over a period of time, you can sort them out. We are now in a situation where there are no instant remedies for any other problems we have.
So let's talk
But having said it, we should not compound the issue by doing wrong things either, right? So I grant that.
So let's talk about one of the fundamental problems that we have at the moment. We do not have US dollars.
Right.
We are in a situation where we need to pay 1.25 billion next year in terms of bonds, 1.5 billion next year, and 1.25 billion on bonds the year after. We barely managed to pay 1 billion US dollars in July this year, and that somewhat saved Sri Lanka from the debt trap at the moment.
We also printed money soon after.
Yeah, but I'm talking about US dollars also. So we're looking at the in USD terms, why isn't the central bank going towards a debt restructuring program? What is the reason? Why are we so adamant about it? Why aren't we doing it?
I don't think they are. They're adamant about. They are not taking a position about debt restructuring, as far as I know. I can see. I have seen. I have heard that there is a huge reluctance to go to the IMF.
Yeah.
But going to the IMF and debt restructuring are not one and the same thing. Going to IMF can help in the process, but without going to IMF also, there are countries which have engaged in debt restructuring.
Example, Greece, for an example.
Yeah, and debt restructuring, in Greece, of course, IMF came in.
Yeah.
And mind you, debt restructuring is not a recent thing. Even before IMF came into being, there have been debt restructuring and debt reprofiling. I do not have any information as to whether central bank is considering that or not.
No, but
nor have they made, to my knowledge, any pronouncement that they won't do it. In fact, if my memory is correct, I think Dr. Jayasundara had alluded to the need for debt restructuring in a couple of recent
So, Dr. Egarek,
statements.
what happens when you do a debt restructuring program with the assistance of the IMF?
IMF has at least the argument goes like this, that IMF has a large talent pool with expertise in supporting debt restructuring exercises all over the world for a long period of time. So therefore, if you go to them, they will help. But having said it, that kind of expertise can also be assembled elsewhere. So it's not absolutely essential. But debt restructuring is essential for Sri Lanka.
Why is that?
Because now you in fact I have to correct you, the annual debt service requirements over the next 3 to 5 years averages around $5 billion.
Yeah, but
in the next 6 months, in the next 12 months, the requirement is $6.7 billion, right?
But we have to pay 2 bonds, 1.5 billion and
that is
1.25
bonds
billion.
only.
Yes.
That is bonds only.
ISB.
Sovereign bonds.
ISBs, but ISBs are only around $13 billion.
$13.4 billion.
Everything added together is about 50 billion. Government is 35 and private sector, all of that, about $50 billion. So you see, remember, let's go back to the numbers both Gajendran and Indrajit spoke about earlier. We are importing $20 billion worth of merchandise imports, exporting around $10 to $12 billion merchandise. Then on top of that, you have IT and service exports and all of that. And then you have this year probably $5.5 to $6 billion of remittances. So you are still short by different accounting, $2 billion, $3 billion. And that is on top of that 6.7. So, you can't pay that. Now, I have seen suggestions that FDI inflows, right, one way or the other, sometimes to do with local assets, all sorts of arrangements where some money will come. And then people talk of swaps, then people talk of bilateral loans. But I find it difficult to imagine even that the required amount of funds can be generated that way. So then what we need is arrangements where either the lenders agree to reduce the amount they will take. Right? That's called a haircut in the jargon, right? We have to give them 100, but they will be satisfied with 80 or something. The other is reprofiling. The problem we have, big problem is this bunching up. So you can spread it over a longer period of time. So those are the things which can be done, and that's been done many, many times all over the world. And these things have been happening for more than a century.
So what if we don't pay? We say we don't have the money, we default.
Yeah. Well,
we can't do it.
Yeah.
And countries like Argentina has survived very well after announcing bankruptcy. Yeah. What happens if we do that?
Without a very detailed discussion, it's difficult to sort of project because there are so many uncertainties. But immediately there are going to be problems, because once you default, right, the global markets lose confidence in you, right? Therefore, they are not going to lend any money any further. That's one. Or it's going to be very hard. If they are going to lend, it will be at very high rates of interest and various other conditionalities, right? Secondly, no one will want to invest. Foreigners would not want to come and invest in Sri Lanka because they know the situation is very bad. They will not be even able to take dividends out. So why do you want to invest here if you can't take your money profits out and dividends away, right? So it's a.
But we will still survive.
It is not just a crisis then.
But we will still survive, Dr. Ganayak.
Not in our scale.
You see, survival, the problem of survival is we are importing what? 80% of or more of our sugar requirements. We are importing perhaps 70% or even more of our milk requirements, right? We are importing a massive amount of wheat and wheat flour, right? We are importing maybe 90% of our medicines, drugs, right? So in such a situation, to be isolated from the world trade would mean enormous difficulties for the people.
But now, of course, Dr. Ekanaka, we don't have sugar and milk powder in the market, though we are supposed to import
I know.
it.
Yeah, Mr. Ekanaka, just a quick...
Can I
but
say
now it's
something to
available.
what Asra asked about what good things can be said about the government?
Yeah, you only asked for two.
Huh?
Just two.
No,
Two
if you can-
instances.
Two instances.
If you can name,
wait,
five,
No, wait.
then-
I think there are issues, there are peripheral issues which we have been discussing many pieces of it, many symptoms. But there's a fundamental issue in this country, fixing the trade deficit. I think this government, for the first time in history, Mahinda Rajapaksa government didn't do it, Yahapalana government didn't do it. Previously, the only other government that did was Mr. R. Premadasa's government, which was basically addressing the exports issue. And this government, for the first time, took it as an issue. I think that's the right thing. They did, you were talking about turmeric, and well, it is right, its prices have gone up. But the fact of the matter is, we are shifting towards it. Now, if the prices are high, what happens in the market? What happens in the market is, now, when the prices are high, that draws more people into production of it. This is how the markets work. And if you import it, as it has happened in the past, then what happens is Sri Lankan producers don't see any incentive of producing
So
that.
this is, let's look at this holistically. Let's take an eagle's eye view on this video. Now, the government is saying the price of rice, the maximum retail price of rice has been now lifted, and hence the producer and the person who is putting this into the market can put up a maximum rate for the rice in question. So right now, if you go and buy a kilo of kirisamba, it's at 215 rupees a kilo.
Yep.
It was at 165 rupees a kilo when Dudley Sirisena and the clan came and announced right after the price control was lifted. However, now it's 215 rupees a kilo. I'm talking as a layman. Then the government is of the opinion, now we are in an organic fertilizer mentality. Okay, now we are in an organic fertilizer mentality. Then the government is of the opinion that they want to bring down 6,000 metric tons of rice. Now my question to them is, Indrajit, and to you is, this rice that is being imported to Sri Lanka, because they want to retain the price and make sure that the prices are controlled, is it organic?
You know, first thing is, I'm not going to answer the organic issue because I'm not there. You know, I think
No,
it's
I'm saying the illogical thing of the government.
but the thing is, coming to the rice issue,
Yeah.
they messed it up. They messed it up for two reasons. They allowed few intermediaries to manage the whole thing, which we call oligopolistic markets in economics, and they collude, and then they fix it. And it's unfortunate thing is, the one who are producing are being suppressed by the monopolist, and also one who are buying, again, being exploited by the monopolist. This both are happening at the same time. I think in that respect, government has failed to break that rice mafia.
So now, in this, you're all saying a fact that where the government has failed. Now,
You see,
two points where the government has performed well.
I never said government did the right things all the way.
No, you said the government
But I
has
said
done.
the fundamental issue of this country, where it is the dollar issue, they did the right thing. But then they got distracted into so many other things. And also, there's another point about the government. When you say government, there's a president, there are ministers, and there are bureaucrats. They are all part of the government. They are all advising that way and this way. And unless if someone is very careful with regard to what exactly you want to be done, there can be all kinds of directional pulling.
But that
And
is
you might
why,
end up-
Indrajit, we appoint a president.
No, true enough.
That is why we appoint a president.
No, the point
if any Tom, Dick and Harry can lead the country, they would be in that
No,
seat.
the thing
And
is-
if they are going to listen to one person pulling from this corner and another person pulling
I
from
think
that
your
corner.
argument is a bit political. Your argument is bit political.
No, I am
That's
not
the way
political.
I
I'm
look at it
saying-
this way.
yeah.
Let's look at economics of it. president is a politician. I think he's made. Now you are talking about his.
No, president is not a politician because when he was elected,
he's a politician.
No, when he was elected, he
he's
came
a
in
politician.
as but
everybody getting elected is a politician,
right.
but they have to have the visionary to drive the other technocrats to do the right thing. Now you were talking about the president's speech. I agree with you. That's not the kind of speech the president should be talking. But at the same time, president did say something good. He said, when I went to environmental conference, I took 7 people. And my wife took her personal ticket. Now, to me, that's a big message. I think we are missing a lot of things that are required in this country to put things right. We can't be blaming the president. I mean, look at ourselves. Even I look at, I'm a teacher.
Yeah, the president all said that when he goes on the road, he only uses 2 backup vehicles. Look at other ministers in the government.
No, that's the whole problem. That's
so who is responsible?
No, the point. Now let's look at it this way. I mean, I think this is my analysis.
If the president is supposed to take the decision, boil it down to the grassroots.
Absolutely.
Tell the grassroots also. Tell the ministers. Tell the cabinet. Tell
I think you're hitting the nail. You're hitting the nail.
So tell them.
I agree with you. This is what he should do.
Just coming to a fora and explaining as to what he did is not necessary.
No, right. This is what my opening statement. I said, me doing something and saying, look, I did it, nobody cares.
Yeah, so
but
what?
If it is the president, and he started off very well, he said, I'm going to be very simple, but what is necessary is make that the national policy. Get everybody else to follow the same thing. That's what the president should be doing. And the second point, as far as this country is concerned, we don't talk about something, because everything we talk about economics, figures, but there's something that is missing in this country. Which other countries which have developed, we don't have the discipline. Discipline in the road, transparency, discipline in the organizations, accountability. Those are the matters which we don't put an economic value, but they are absolutely big factors that cut into everything.
So let me just, I want to pick Gajendran's brain as well. Gajendran, do you agree to what Indrajit is saying or do you disagree?
I think it's a little unfair towards the government.
It's unfair?
Yeah, because I don't think the government, the state is convinced what they are doing is right. I don't think people, at least in key position, who is advising, they feel that something wrong is being done, where a lot of people, majority may, not that I am in agreement with what is being done, they are convinced that that's that is the way forward. Right?
Or they are in denial.
No, I don't think so, because there are slight corrective actions that are being taken. But of course, if we are making imprudent decision, we will pay for it.
Corrective action or damage control?
Huh?
Corrective action or damage control?
Whatever it is.
Gandhi, have you gone on the streets and spoken to the people? Like
no, but there again, I'm sure the decision makers are having their pulse to the ground. You know, they are hearing all these things. There is one school of thought within them, they may be feeling that this is all political. But if you see, now you put my friend Anura into a fix by asking a question on Chamber of Commerce. Now there are not only Chamber of Commerce who are enjoying deafening silence, there are so many institutions. And if they are not speaking and going and telling what has to be told, naturally they will think that the large institutions, established institutions are not coming and articulating that something is inadequate or infirm in their thought processes.
I agree with you, Gajendran. Now when we do a show on exports challenges in Sri Lanka, try inviting people from the Tea Export Association. No one would come. No one would want to express their opinions in public. Everyone seems to be probably scared, don't want to express their opinion, and are hiding. Now, this is the problem that we are facing at the moment.
Oh, are they convinced?
But
are they convinced with the?
I don't think that's very fair, because there have been people Now take the fertilizer issue. On that, there have been scientists, professionals, and also organizations which have been very, very articulate.
Yeah, that is the academics. Now, I will tell you,
Not only
Dr.
academics.
Ekanayaka, they have been, now we did a show last week and we spoke about the fertilizer problem, about the Chinese ship that is carrying Bacillus and Erwinia. And is it prudent to bring down this ship to the country and use it? Then most of them said this is not the way to move about. This is not acceptable. So we have given them the platform who wants to voice their opinion. We have given them the platform to do so. But most often than not, these organizations don't come to the forefront. They don't want to express their opinion in public. So that is a challenge. Now when Azra is organizing panelists for a particular show in question, she finds it so hard to get the direct stakeholders. You can't even invite anyone from the government. The government is scared because they will lose face in front of the media. So these are the problems that we face as an organization as well, trying to get these stakeholders, get the people who are responsible, accountable into action. That is a massive problem. Yes.
But as problems escalate, aggravate, there will be people who are willing to come forward and speak.
So don't worry, Gajendra, there is
it.
always an option. So Gajendra is laughing.
But I think there's another issue.
Yeah.
I think this country's private sector, which are the drivers of the economy, are not driving policy. They are behind the screen, very often trying to get things done in a different way rather than creating a private sector opinion and creating a force so that the policies can be pushed in a common ground. They are doing it individuals.
There's also this point. I'm sorry, Hassan, just one final question. You're a teacher, you're a lecturer at the Columbia University. Just recently, we made a visit to the Consular Affairs Division at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Before that, we went to the passport office. We checked a couple of locations and we saw youth from 20 to 30 years of age standing outside in queues, long queues, waiting to get their documentation certified so they can go abroad. So we went and asked, why are you trying to leave the country? Some said for education. Some said, in the Levadakne, there's no point staying here. So in a situation like this, when the young generation, the people who are supposed to take over the country someday, the future of the country is leaving the country, we have lost hope. Or whatever that the government or the authorities are doing is not working, is what I am trying to understand.
You know, there are two things. One is there's something called having a certain policies and actions. And the second is how do you articulate it? And how do you make people convinced, look, something can be expected. And for that, they have to show accountability all the time. What we do miss in this country, or the fundamental miss in this country is there's no accountability, which is not even happening in the academic fields as well. There's no accountability. When I have a stakeholder, I'm accountable to them. You know, when you don't have that accountability, basically those people feel left out. They're helpless.
No, the thing is, Indrajit, look at the priorities. You were right before when you said the government has got its priorities mixed up. You heard Prime Minister
I didn't say priorities mixed up. What I said was they got distracted. From their main focus.
Yeah, but now
I would have definitely seen them focused on it, driving in it, and throwing their full weight.
Look at Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa addressing the SLPP conference, and President Gotabaya Rajapaksa addressing the recent conference when he was unveiling 1,500 carpeted roads. What was the focus? The focus was about getting the people who drew pictures on the walls to come back and draw them again. Now, Indrajit, as Azra said, people are lining up at passport offices, are lining up at consul officers. People are lining up at the US Embassy, Canadian Embassy, New Zealand Embassy, Austrian High Commission. Why? They don't want to be drawing pictures on walls and tell someone to express their opinion. They don't want to live in this country. There is no sugar. There is mafia in rice. prices of gas have skyrocketed. 2,670, 12.5 kilogram of gas cylinder. Medicinal prices will go up because there is a shortage of US dollars at the moment. Today I saw in papers that the prices of medicine is going to go up. Yet to be seen, however. Milk powder prices went up. Just when the government is lost for words, when they can't do anything, they let the mafias run the country. Has that ever happened in Sri Lanka before?
Well, it has been the case in this country. This is not just happening now. It has been the problem in this country. We never created that broad-based market system in this country. We let few people run the whole show. Now it is getting exposed. Let's be very honest about it. And you're talking about people going out of this country. People have been going out all the time. You know, we are in education. We know how many people go out. You know, that happens. But I'm just connecting that to a particular situation is not quite the right explanation. I mean, this is basically a kind of a narrative. But I'm not discounting that, okay, this is totally discardable. But the point here is, I still believe, if the president listens to these aspects, if the president sees these things from a right perspective, and if he gets his strategies into right focus, right management, we can still get out of it. And the last point,
is the president listening to all now?
Well, you said the president is listening.
Yeah.
I think the whole point about this talking here, getting him to listen to this.
Mr. Aponso, I think, very sorry, I need to draw my attention to Mr. Ekanayaka because I think like Azra and Shamir were mentioning, there is no hope in the country. There is no hope on the economic front as well. And Mr. Ekanayaka was speaking about, you know, going for haircuts and debt profiling. You spoke about debt restructuring, basically. Given what is happening in the country, foreign reserves are depleting, prices of goods are skyrocketing, people are leaving the country. What confidence will the lenders have to agree with Sri Lanka and come to a common table and agree and say, look, we are going to give you concessions? Why do you think that will happen?
Yes, it will happen because simply because the lenders would rather take a little money back or something less than what they gave than losing the whole thing. That's the simplest reason, and that's how it has been happening world over. Only thing is, the authorities must make a concerted effort towards getting that process, you know, start and get it going.
But Mr. Ekanayaka, once that happens, eventually it will lead in the loss of investor confidence, isn't it? Because anyway, we are looking at FDIs and we will have to obtain more loans in future. That's how the world works.
Yes.
And how are we going to survive if we go for debt restructuring? Because that will paint, you know, tarnish our image and say, look, this country can't pay its debt on time.
Now, I think it was Gajendran who mentioned Argentina. Or you did, right? It has happened several times over, right? So it doesn't mean the end of the world. Of course, for several years, the people will have to undergo severe hardships. That's what happens. But then after a while, then things get sorted out, people come back. But all of that depends on a long-term, medium to long-term mindset in terms of the strategic framework. Not trying to solve the symptom, address the symptoms as they occur. It can't be done. I mean, that's the point I'm trying to raise right from the start of this conversation. Don't get, let me borrow the same word from my friend Indrajit, distraction. Don't get distracted. By the way, the opening line I said was the desperate times, not desperate times, not drastic. Desperate times calls for desperate measures. I guess that's what is happening. And I'm not saying that those measures are right. but I can understand why some of those things may be happening. Unfortunate thing is all those measures are creating what is called an anti-export bias. So although the rhetoric of the government may be export promotion, as Indrajit said, its actions are in the opposite direction. Now, when you maintain the currency, by dictate, fixing at a particular level, what does it do? It creates an anti-export bias, because by keeping the currency at that level, you make imports cheaper, relatively, right? So, the whole point here is the conversations like this. I'm challenging you guys, my friends, have to be about the underlying issues and how we are going to correct. And we must get out of this thing of depending on a president to address all the problems in the nation. We have to move towards building a system, right, which can look after this nation. It's not a president. President can come, they do come and go. They can do some, on the surface, some improvements, changes, whatever. But the system, the economic system, the political system, and all these interconnected systems ought to be self-sustaining and self-managing.
Yeah, but
right?
the thing is,
Dr. It's the wrong, in my view, my humble submission to you, is the wrong question.
Yeah.
Putting everything onto the president, because presidents can't do it. They are not gods.
No one is trying to put everything on the president.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, people are looking up to the president for action and for direction.
They shouldn't.
Because at the end of the day,
they shouldn't, because point.
There is no policies in Sri Lanka. There is no national education policy. There is no exports policy in the country. There are no policies in the country. So
I think that's a wrong statement now. I mean, that's not a fair statement.
Do we have education policy in the country?
Let's look at it this way. You see, now, I mean, I'm not going to sort of go into specific details.
Right.
I mean, these policies, you are not going to do it every 5 years or something.
These policies have to be there for a
period of time. And these policies are fairly complicated. I mean, there is a domestic side. There is a traditional side of Sri Lankan psyche. There are so many factors coming into play. But my real focus is, as far as the president's, I plead with the president, is that for you to get the economy right, focus on fundamental issues. Don't get into everything. You're not going to solve all these things and the more you try to pile up peripheral issues, you miss the fundamental issue.
Right. Gajendra, you usually tell stories about the Bible and about today no stories.
It's also out of stock now.
What is the way forward, Gajendra, in your opinion? If you were to tell government a message, what would it be?
Basically, first thing they have to stop all wrong is corruption. They have, you have to have a commitment from all sides of the divide in parliament, and where you have to minimize corruption. Then you have to use technology, interconnectivity to raise revenue. Basically you can't, this debt mentality has to go off. You have to raise revenue. Then you can't interfere with the markets. First of all, we have an overvalued rupee, right? And the government or anyone have no business to go and reach private people, private citizens, private companies, wealth and currencies and start converting. You cannot do this, because if you start interfering with the market, if you don't have discipline in decision making, and if you don't make substantive based decisions, and if you are not going to be accountable, there is no point talking, because all what we do is a cut and paste job. We will make some cosmetic adjustment for the time being, and we go on and go on and on. Now the question is, there are certain convictions the state has at the moment, right or wrong. I think clearly state that we will never default. Right? So they are saying they will never default.
So we have a quick question for Dr. Eganaka. I'll come back to you, Kajendra. I have a question for you as well. But before we lose the heat of this argument about not holding the president accountable alone, so the quick question to you is: the president, right after being elected to office, speaking to the state in a public address, said that he wanted a 2/3 majority to govern the country. So the 2/3 majority was given by the people to the government in power. And when the president is not governing the country now, who are we to look at? As Gajendran says, we have to look at the gods now for some survival and some, a way to move forward. The president should be held accountable, isn't it? So that's the question.
He is accountable. He is accountable. He has a choice to decide whether he wants to come forward for another election or not, and he will have to stand in front of the people. So he is accountable. Now, of course, as I said earlier, we don't have a system where mid-term the citizens have a way of enforcing their will on a government. Unfortunately, we don't have that. There are countries which have it. That's a way, that is a direction in which we should aim to go, in my view. So, president is accountable, but my whole point is, we are going, this is like our mentality, talking of the president as if he was the king. This mentality, this is a wrong mentality.
No,
hold on, let me complete this, will you?
Yeah.
We are still living in feudal times in our thought process, right? It is not about one man, right, in order to get the country to move in the right direction. It's about the systems we have and how are decisions taken. You see, when a president says something, are all the others listening? Or are they doing whatever they like to do? So I think that's a wrong question. I'm not saying he is not accountable. All politicians are accountable.
Should be held accountable.
They should be accountable, and they are accountable. But the view that the president will know the answers to all the problems is wrong.
No, but
no human being is not going to be able to be that.
Yeah.
Right? We have to have systems where the available knowledge, information is gathered, conveyed, and discussions are taken place.
Yeah. Now,
pros
Dr.
and
Eganaka,
cons are studied, and decisions are taken.
Now, just prior to the election manifestos are released by respective presidents. You had the manifesto of Sajid Premadasa, you had the manifesto of Anukumara Sanayaka, you had the manifesto of Gotabaya Rajapaksa as well. So people go and vote mainly looking at the manifesto.
Correct.
And when what the manifesto articulates are not being implemented, then who are we to look up to? Because we wanted a change, the people wanted a change. That is why in 2015, when there was somewhat of a decision taken by the former president about the 18th Amendment to the Constitution, people wanted to show a protest vote in 2015. That is how the Yahapalne government came into power. Then the people want to say, no, this is not what we want. We want to reject the government in power. As a result of that, the UNP was only able to take one vote, one additional vote, a nationalist seat, through the election campaign that was held, a protest vote. So people vote for manifestos. Look at what manifesto of Gotabaya Rajapaksa said about fertilizer being given, this thing, how meritocracy would come into play. Look at the speaker's detail of employees. Most of them are
Yeah, so the point is,
all of them are relatives.
Yeah, but the citizens will take that into account at the next time around. So
But
now
when
that's
the next time around, at what cost? At what expense?
Absolutely. This is why this is the critical point. That is why I am saying, rather than a simple what is called representative democracy, we need to move towards a participatory democracy where things like on major issues plebiscites can be held. Recall, these are all words, but there's meaning. Recall is possible, where people can on their own decide on right things and force the government to do.
Yeah.
It's not there now.
Samin, I have a
Right?
question for you.
You have a question. Unfortunately, Gajendra, today I'm not in the mood to
the
respond
answers
to
will
the
come
question.
out. Now tell me what are the significant components of the manifesto which have not been implemented?
I'll tell you one. Fertilizer was told to be given free. Was it given? Did you read the manifesto?
Was it told to be given free?
No, I think
Yeah,
it
it
was.
was.
Well, fertilizer has been given free. I mean, during
Free?
the last Mahinda Rajapan's government, fertilizer has been given
this
free.
government.
Yeah, this government. One thing I recollect is organic fertilizer conversion will take place over 10 years.
Yeah, 10 years.
Which
So
is
that
the
was
right
not done.
thing.
No,
Which
no,
is the
no,
right
no,
thing.
but now Gajendra wanted to know what
Over a
part of the
period of 10
manifesto has
years,
not
you
been
can't
done.
do it in 1 year, no?
Yeah, that's where the mistake
So,
was.
but how did this government do it? On the
No, my
22nd
question is,
of
what is the
22nd of May, they said that the fertilizer won't be there for the next year season.
Yeah, no, what is the component of the manifesto?
I just told you too.
I don't know
You want
whether it was told fertilizer will be given free.
Can I say something
Yeah.
about these
Are
particular
you sure?
conversations? These conversations, we can do it in two different ways. One is we look at it from a we basically come here to criticize.
Yeah.
Or are we wanted to bring about a change? I am with the latter. We criticize, but objectively criticize and get the people to think positively and objectively.
That's
okay, we need a
exactly
change.
what we are doing. We are trying to objectively criticize. We can't change the people in power, but we can criticize actions that need to be adjusted, realigned with the objective of the country at large. So we're going for a short commercial break, gentlemen. When we come back, it's the final round. We are in conversation with N.R. Gajendran, Dr. Ekanayaka, as well as Indrajit Afonso. Stay connected, stay with Face the Nation. We will be right back. Welcome back. This is Face the Nation. Our topic of discussion today is Budget 2022 and the country's economic policies. We now start off the final round with Indrajit Afonso, Senior Lecturer, Department of Economics, University of Colombo.
So I'm supposed to give my final
Final thoughts.
final verdict.
Final
on it.
verdict, yes.
Okay. First of all, we need the particular dollar issue to be tackled decisively. I would imagine they are going to the IMF, and because going to IMF is not just getting the funding. Going to IMF is about something broader than that. And the second point is, once it is done, at the government, we were talking about restructuring. If you just walk into restructuring now, it's not manageable. And it's going to put us into much more difficult situation because people will lose trust on our future viability. So IMF is a way out as a backup. And the second is, once it is done, you will find some of the dollar issues, some of the issues that are prevailing now will ease out. So that's one. The second point is, as far as the organic fertilizer matter is concerned, I think the government should take a step back and they should go for a hybrid policy, not direct controls, but through incentives, so that people are given incentives to walk into that, and that will definitely work through the market. Because as we see, if you go to a supermarket, you find that organic food are fetching better prices. So let the market do the thing. Thirdly, government should not be trying to do controls. The more you do controls, more you're getting into difficulties and problems. And fourthly, that the country requires a leadership, and President has shown certain qualities, but those qualities have to be taken to the national level. So every minister, every cabinet minister, every parliamentarian should be observing that. And you all said about various people having their private family members in the staff. These are bad examples. And telling people to tighten their belts and you're doing these kind of things, not the right thing. So that has to be exemplary. Fourthly, this country requires discipline, and that is what many countries have developed, because the discipline means you bring down the risk premium in everything: living, livelihoods, occupations, and businesses. So these few things, if you get things done, these are not politically difficult issues, and if you get these things done, I'm sure Sri Lanka can make a definite outcome. And the last point is, with regard to the balance of payment problem, they should stay focused on that.
Right, thank you very much. Indrajit Aponso, Senior Lecturer, Department of Economics, University of Colombo. I now move attention to Dr. Andre Kanayaka, economist and the former chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you. We are having the national budget for next year taken up in a couple of days' time in the Parliament. Top priority is to reduce the budget deficit, because a deficit budget means that we are living beyond our means. Second, take action, correct the policy environment towards reducing the trade deficit and also balance of payments deficit, right? Do encourage a situation where policy decisions, before being taken, open dialogue with the stakeholders, and the decisions are finally taken with a degree of transparency, a degree of consensus, and evidence-based. Without that, we are not, just because someone likes something, thinks that something is right, that's not the way to go forward. In resource allocation, corruption, even more than that, wastage should be eliminated. Public investments should be towards things which give a just return, not purely, building monuments to satisfy the egos of certain individuals. Finally, what was the last one I was going to tell you? Yes, the whole paradigm of development ought to change from physical infrastructure towards human capital development and greater reliance on technology. Move away from bricks and mortar. I think those are the priorities for our nation to move forward and sort out the problems we have.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anureka Naika. I now move attention to the very vocal N.R. Gajendran, tax specialist.
Samira, now the way forward. I am going to read something in brief in one of these Sunday editorials. This newspaper said, "Mind your path, Sri Lanka." It says, in the last 30 days, I won't mention names, names have been mentioned here. 30 days we have heard so and so saying, "I don't have much experience. Those with experience must advise." Second top person said, "All youth that supported us are now lining up to go overseas." Another third person said, "There is nothing to offer to the people in this budget. We have to take from the people." The fourth person said, "The country is heading towards bankruptcy. No one will be able to raise the head till 2029. Another said, if there is no rice, eat gram. The other person said, "The cabinet was unaware of the power agreement. We knew only when the minutes of the meeting arrived." But, another minister said, "Never there have been so much corruption. And even during the previous regime, we condemn so much. It's far more than that." Last person said, "Look here, he has been in parliament. This is the worst parliament that he has experienced in his life." This is the background on which we have to charter our course for the future. Sri Lanka. Catch 22. Have we crossed the Rubicon and have we hit nadir? Or there is hope? Or whether it's a hopeless situation? There is no life without hope. Basically, Samira and friends, there are two things. If we in this governance, there are two things that we have to. I will not go into details. If you are in public governance, there are two things. One is honesty. So I'm dealing. It has to be, financial honesty and intellectual honesty. Has to be in place. Has to be restored. And the other one is intelligence. We have to make considered decisions, not ad hoc decisions. That was mentioned, considered decision, informed, learned decisions, and we have to be accountable and have to be held accountable. The minimum is on that heads must roll. Either they must own up and step down and go, or someone must come and say, "Thank you very much, sir. We could have done better, so we are going to try someone else." Otherwise, we are in trouble.
Thank you very much, N.R. Gajendran. I just want to add, Gajendran, I just read the same editorial that you spoke about 2 days ago, which was published on the papers. What catched my heart and what catched my thoughts were the part which says Sri Lanka must remain a country of the people, by the people, for the people. So that is what caught my attention as far as the editorial was concerned.
That was not told by the leaders, somebody told by the newspapers.
Yeah, by the newspaper, absolutely. What caught my attention? Gajendran, just to correct you there. So thank you very much, N.R. Gajendran, a tax specialist, for joining us this evening on the show. Dr. Anureka Naika, economist and former chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, and also Indrajit Aponso, senior lecturer, Department of Economics, University of Colombo. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us this evening on the show. It was absolutely a pleasure to have your thoughts and your insights on Sri Lanka's economy. Budget 2022, as well as a little bit of politics here and there as well. So thank you very much for that, gentlemen. It's always respected and welcomed. Thank you very much, Azra, for putting up a wonderful panel for discussion on Face the Nation tonight. And thank you very much, Hassan, for joining us this evening on the show. I leave you tonight with a quote, as I always do. You must gain control over your money, or the lack of it will forever control you. Take care.